You're watching the Air and Space Channel.
Electric cars are everywhere. As governments and consumers keep a close eye on fuel emissions, the growth in electrical vehicles and hybrid electrical vehicles is climbing rapidly and will continue at a staggering rate. The international consumer is well versed in charging stations and supporting applications. Here in Paris, France, the streets which once served horses and carriages now combine parking places with charging stations. But what about the aviation industry? If electric cars are grabbing market shares, where are the electric aircraft? With basically 100,000 worldwide commercial flights daily, and each aircraft releasing carbon into the atmosphere, what does the future hold for commercial aviation?
So I think the next decade in aviation is really all about sustainability. How we make that transition to reducing carbon and making aviation to where it really fulfills the promises made 50 years ago on the first Earth Day. A lot of focus today on CO2 emissions, and obviously airplanes, particularly long-range airplanes, really work on hydrocarbon-based fuels. And so I think for the bigger airplanes, where we're headed is sustainable aviation fuels, biofuels, synthetic fuels, things that are carbon neutral when you look at the cycle of it. But I don't see in the next decade or 2 decades a major shift in long-term air transportation away from the kinds of liquid fuels that we use today. They're just so good in terms of energy density. They're so convenient to use. They're relatively safe compared to the alternatives, and all of the infrastructure is theirs.
Though the use of large electrical aircraft for long trips is not part of the immediate future, smaller electric aircraft are poised to make a significant contribution to what is known as the urban air mobility market. Urban aerial mobility involves all types of aerial transportation systems in heavily congested urban areas. Shipping companies such as Amazon are now cleared by the FAA to use drones to deliver cargo. Medical companies provide emergency transport of blood and organs via helicopters from one hospital to another. Helicopters also serve as the primary vehicle for air taxis. It is here, in the urban markets, where small electrical aircraft can revolutionize the transportation of passengers who are eager to avoid the endless miles of automobile traffic.
So I think we're going to see a real renaissance in the smaller part of aviation, where electric will really come in and change the way we build small airplanes, just the way it's changed first the model airplanes and then it changed the drones. Essentially all the small commercial drones are electric. And you're starting to see that come into the general aviation sector. And I think that's going to continue. At Electra, we are focused on developing hybrid electric aircraft for regional mobility, filling that gap between what the very small battery-powered vertical takeoff and landing airplanes are going to be able to do, sort of in what's talked about as the urban mobility market, picking up from the maybe 20-mile range that those things are really going to have, I think, in practice, and extending it out to a couple of 100 miles, an area where historically aviation looks good from the time-saving point of view, but never has really been able to displace cars as the primary mode of transportation, even at 200 or 300 miles. Cars are just so convenient and ubiquitous. But some of the new air transportation options, I think really are going to change that. And Electra's goal is to be at the forefront of that revolution.
When a traveler balances time and cost on a regional trip, the automobile is normally chosen as the mode of transportation. The traveler can conveniently walk out the front door, get in a car, find an expressway, and average about 50 miles per hour en route to the determined destination. When such trips need to cover a longer distance, the equation changes and the possibility of flying is considered.
When you say you start to want to go 100 miles, that's 2 hours or so, you begin to go, well, airplanes can go 200 miles an hour. That should be a lot faster. But of course, the challenge in that is getting to the airplane, getting on and off the airplane, getting from your door to its door, and then from wherever it drops you off to wherever you actually want to go.
An air passenger today is recommended to arrive at the airport 2 hours prior to the scheduled flight departure. So actual travel time begins when the traveler leaves home or the office and heads to the airport. On this first leg of the journey, there is heavy traffic, which causes a delay. For today's purpose, this trip to the airport takes 30 minutes. The next step involves parking the car at a satellite location and riding a courtesy bus to the terminal, which takes about 20 minutes. The next 45 minutes involves hustling to the appropriate terminal, patiently making it through security, and then finding the gate. There is a 45-minute wait for boarding to begin. Once on board, the aircraft taxis to the runway and then waits 15 minutes on the tarmac for its turn to take off. The flight takes its estimated 1 hour and 20 minutes and then lands in the destination city, where it takes another 20 minutes to make it to the gate and offload. Traveler now powers through another airport, this time heading to ground transportation in search of an automobile service. Securing this transportation adds another 20 minutes. The final leg of the journey involves a taxi or Uber, and most likely will include traffic. This drive adds another 30 minutes. As it now stands, total travel time is 3 hours and 5 minutes. If bags are checked, another 45 minutes passes while waiting at the baggage claim, bringing the total travel time to almost 4 hours.
And a lot of what Electra is focused on is taking off as close to the point of origin as possible and landing as close to the point of origin as possible. And if you look at the world, there are soccer-sized fields almost everywhere. I mean, every neighborhood, even the dense urban environments have that. And so people have known for a long time that if you could get into those and make those sort of pocket stole ports or whatever, that you could really have a very different aviation infrastructure than what we've gotten used to.
In 1978, the airline industry pushes for deregulation. The point of deregulation is to lower the average price of an airplane ticket while still being safe. Today, ticket prices are lower, but at a significant cost to the passenger's comfort and convenience.
What was compromised in that was the convenience, what used to be fun of air travel, right? All of that has gone out the window in the name of efficiency, of concentrating people into a few large airports, and then moving them on these hub and spoke networks. The idea of these electric propulsion aircraft is to change that paradigm, to be able to go from the parking garage at a shopping mall, at a metro station, in a local area in your neighborhood, both with on-demand service, where you call it up just the way you call a car service now with an app on your phone, or on scheduled service, where it's run, the same way that airlines are today, where they leave at an appointed time and you purchase a seat on the vehicle. And we think there'll be a big combination of both of those. Both the on-demand and the scheduled will benefit from these access to a lot more places to operate out of.
The airline industry is in need of a new image. The difficult process of getting to and from the airport, combined with cramped seats and fewer amenities, results in most passengers viewing flying as a necessary evil. Something they do not want to do, but must do. The introduction of hybrid electric aircraft for regional flying can change this perception.
We're really talking about sort of 4 freedoms that we're, to paraphrase Roosevelt, that we're focused on that. First is freedom from runways. All of the things that we're doing, even though they have wings, they don't need traditional runways. They can use traditional runways, but we use something called powered lift that gives very high lift coefficients, slow takeoff and landing speeds, and then that translates into very short distances for taking off and landing, 100 feet of ground distance and maybe 300 feet, 100 meters of total space that you need. So anywhere you have a soccer field, football field, you can operate the kinds of airplanes that we're talking about. So the second is freedom from noise. That, one of the great advantages of electric, and I think it's a real one, is the ability to make these airplanes much quieter. The really fundamental problem with helicopters is they're too loud. That's why they haven't had the market penetration that you might think they should, given that they're already runway independent. They're expensive, yes, complex, yes, but it's really, I think, the noise that makes them unattractive neighbors. I say in a helicopter you can land anywhere once, and then you probably won't be allowed to come back in that. And the electric propulsion, I think, really is going to change that. The third thing is that we're pushing is freedom from chargers. We all live in a world where we're always looking at our cell phone. Do I have enough battery left to make this call? Where do I plug it in? Now we're all moving to where our cars are that way, right? Where we're looking at do I have enough electricity and enough battery charge to make this drive, to get home, to get to the next charger? It's hard for me to imagine going to airplanes like that, where you're like, oh my gosh, I have to hit the next charger. But all of these eVTOLs are going to need recharging every time they land. There's just no margin in these in the current batteries for after any kind of flight, and so you're going to need to land at a power station basically every time that you land. And that is going to turn out to be, we think, very constraining in practice, particularly for people who want to go off established routes, any kind of distances. I mean, it's a little like, what's the point of being runway independent if you can't be, charger independent? And so the hybrid solution really offers that, just like we saw as the electric cars came in. The hybrid solutions, you may pull out of your driveway on electric charge, and then you get onto the expressway and the small engine kicks in. So the Electra airplanes recharge themselves as they fly. So one of the big advantages of our airplanes is when they land, they are practically fully charged, and we actually think by the time they've taxied in or sat, the time it takes to get the passengers in and out, the airplane will be recharged. We have no ground charging infrastructure as part of our concept of operations. There's literally a small gas turbine on the airplane, sort of like the auxiliary power units in existing commercial airplanes. And it essentially runs at a constant level virtually all the time. And there are batteries, but the batteries are used for takeoffs and landings for the high power surges. But during the cruise phase, we anticipate that the little turbine provides essentially all the power and even enough to recharge the batteries. Tremendous advantages in that. And then the last one is sort of freedom from crowds. That one of the things that makes current air transportation so taxing as a consumer is that you're constantly queued up for one line or another. You're in a crowded environment. It adds a lot of uncertainty to your planning. How long is it going to take to get through this line or that line? It's a lot of what makes it an unpleasant experience. And in the post-pandemic world, I think people are much more sensitive to the health issues of large crowds. And so what the electric propulsion alternatives are going to do, again, by making sort of every place a runway or a micro airport, are going to significantly change that. So those are some big things, and we're really excited to have Electra participating in what we think is going to be a revolution there.
Breaking from others in the industry, Electra is not developing airplanes for individuals. Instead, they envision a fleet of aircraft, serving the needs of a public who wants more convenient regional travel.
In contrast to a lot of previous sort of general aviation class companies, Electra is not trying to build airplanes for individuals. That we're not seeing what the hybrid electric aircraft as being something that you and I would necessarily own and fly as individuals. We see it much more as part of some sort of fleet operation that is supported and takes benefit of the economies of scale of having a network. In fact, these things make more sense the bigger the network is. It's like the car services that your biggest problem in these is deadheading, where you have to fly a flight and there's no passenger on it. And that's a significant problem today in aviation, in the charter business. It's one of the reasons that charters are so expensive today. The only real way around it is either autonomy, where you don't have a pilot when you reposition the airplane, or enough scale in the network that you're always picking somebody else up, or much of the time you can go pick somebody else up close by and drive them around.
As skies fill with more and more flying vehicles, the status of the International Air Traffic Control System faces daunting challenges and complexities. Though there are calls for a complete overhaul of the system, such a process is unlikely due to extraordinary expense required.
All of these new trends in aviation, whether they're cargo delivery drones or the urban air mobility vehicles, or even the kinds of stuff Electra is working on, depend on advances in the air traffic control system, modernization of the air traffic control system to make them work. So it's not just certifying the vehicles, it's getting the air traffic control system to work well. Because of that, Electra's particular business plan is really focused on building vehicles that fit into today's air traffic control system. So we do not depend on evolution of the national airspace system nearly as much as some of the other competing ideas do. That doesn't mean we're not total advocates for the continued evolution and improvement and modernization of the air traffic control system. It just means that we've been more conservative in laying out the business plan and the approach. All of our airplanes will have pilots, right? Single pilot operations is basically the norm of what we're designing around. And while there'll be a lot of advanced automation and even autonomy in the cockpits for some of the complex things like the precision landing, there's always going to be well, not always. For the foreseeable future, the Electra airplanes have a pilot flying them.
The introduction and systematic advancements in electric aircraft, as well as other aerospace innovations, will require new and important contributions from future generations of young minds. Since the beginning of the aviation industry, the recruitment of young talent has been an integral part of long-range planning.
In the past, aviation and aerospace was a frontier. It was on the evening news, it was exciting, and it naturally attracted people in it. through that constant attention and the excitement that it brought. As it's matured as a field, it's moved off the front pages, and so the aerospace industry has had to pay more attention to the idea of getting kids basically excited about the potential of aerospace. Now that turns out not to be hard, right? You just kind of have to expose kids of any background and culture to the kinds of excitement that goes on in our business and our industry, and they get excited. It's a natural education tool. But nonetheless, you have to make the outreach, you have to make it accessible, you have to provide role models where kids of all backgrounds could see themselves as having a career in some part of aerospace, whether it's designing or flying or running an operation or starting a company or whatever it is. They need role models that are accessible to inspire them and to relate to. So, that's been a big part of my interest and I guess as I get older, it becomes a bigger part of my interest is how you actually take those steps, excite kids, and reach a broader and more diverse audience of kids than our industry has typically attracted.
Quiet in the studio, ready in the control room. Stand by, all positions.
I think Wingspan plays an important role in that, right? Of telling stories, of providing role models, of being able to give a little bit more depth than people see in their typical sort of social media driven world.
Frequently underestimated is the role model airplanes and model rockets play in attracting young people to the aviation field. The aviation community sponsors the American Rocketry Challenge, which involves 5,000 middle and high school students designing, building, and launching model rockets. The educational value of the contest is immeasurable and builds upon a model rocket tradition that began in the 1950s. One of the earliest model manufacturers is Vernon Estes, who in 1958 establishes Estes Industries. With a factory near Penrose, Colorado, the city earns the title Model Rocket Capital of the World. The influence of the Estes models is far-reaching in the world of aviation.
If you don't have to go very far in the aerospace industry of talking to people before almost everybody gets back to some story about when they flew an Estes model rocket at some point in their life, either as a kid themselves or with their own children or whatever. And as I've been involved in sort of, I'll call them professionally organized STEM outreach activities where the Aerospace Industries Association is making formal efforts, I really came to appreciate how powerful an educational tool things like model rockets are. They really do bring together both the theory and the practice and getting kids outdoors and building stuff and flying it, and they spark excitement in a lot of kids. and so in 2018 we became aware that the Estes Rocket Company, which was still around after 70 years or so, its then current owner, the original guy who started it, Vernon Estes, had sold it long ago in 1970. So it had been through a succession of owners, some of whom took better care of it than others. But the most recent owner had gotten into financial trouble and had been caught up in a bankruptcy. And we said, wow, if this thing goes away, if Estes goes away, a lot of the STEM education foundation goes away. And we said, that would be terrible. We can't allow that to happen. So our family bought it at a bankruptcy sale, and we've been working for the last couple of years to nurse it back to health, in the process sort of reinventing its education side and really making it focused around an education platform, which it's always been, but that hasn't always been its primary, company mission.
The electrification of the aviation industry is inevitable and may be just around the corner. This reality provides for a remarkable time in aerospace and aviation for entrepreneurship. Beginning with the Wright brothers, technological advancements in the aerospace field have left an indelible mark on the history of the world. Practical implementation of aircraft powered by batteries promises to forever change the way people travel. As with all innovation, periods of testing, redesigning, and retesting will push the development forward until it reaches that day when it has arrived.
A lot of the technologies, people sort of talk about, and it seems like they're never going to happen, and then something happens and poof, all of a sudden they're ubiquitous, they're everywhere. The internet is a good example of that, Facebook is a good example of that, Uber is a good example of that, where they appear to come out of almost nowhere when they suddenly take off. But if you've studied how those things happen, there's a whole theory of disruptive innovation and how it gets going. And so I think a lot of that is true right now of a lot of the new aviation concepts, these urban air mobility vehicles. Are they all going to pan out? No, they're definitely not. There's going to be weeding out, there's going to be winners and losers. Not every next great thing in aviation really happens, right? Is this the next very light jet market where there were, 15 years ago, there were 10 or 12 companies pursuing the idea of this personal jet. And I think at the end of the day, there's been one survivor, that was Cirrus, and they went bankrupt and got bought by the Chinese in the process, right? So is the urban air mobility going to be like that, or is it going to be like Uber, where poof, all of a sudden they're everywhere? And that's part of what makes it exciting. That's part of what makes it venture capital, because you don't know until you live through it and find out.
You're watching the Air and Space Channel.